this.
I mean, I think the key thing to all of this is don't be boring, which is sort of silly, but you wouldn't believe how often that gets disregarded. A simple thing for at least me and every writer I ever met is there enough conflict? Have you got enough going on in the scene or in the whole story? And I find that people often write entire screenplays or scenes that are just conflict free. If you haven't got enough conflict, you've got nothing. I think that's incredibly important. I mean, there are a million things. Y'all are writing this thing about John Henry Falk?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, this is, yeah, we're not writing about him, we're writing about that era, and it's sort of that case, to me at least, was, you know, with the blacklist and the McCarthy era, they were indicted, and they were tried and convicted in the public, and this guy fought back.
So
and
that's a very good beginning for a character, because I think character is everything. If you don't have a good central character, it's kind of over. And someone who fights is automatically interesting because you've got to keep, this is for a television series, correct?
Yeah.
So you've got to keep somebody interested for 100 episodes, which is a lot. And so if you've got a character who's a fighter, that really helps. Do any of y'all watch Ray Donovan?
Yeah.
I see no hands.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Ray Donovan is more of a hired gun. I mean,
well, he's a fixer in Hollywood, kind of like Eddie Mannix was years ago, but he's today. And but the thing I like about Ray Donovan, and this has been my favorite, that's my favorite show right now anyway, although I'm watching Stranger Things and I'm enjoying that a lot, is that, how many of y'all have seen Ray Donovan, any of it? A couple, okay. He's the central character and totally compelling all the time. He's got around him, I think I sent you a handout that Norman can give you or whatever later, called the character relationship chart, which is just a hand-drawn thing that I do with everything I write, which is the central character is in the middle, and you write his name with a circle around it, and then below him is his allies, and above him are his enemies. And the thing in Ray Donovan that I took away from seeing the pilot and then now several years of the show is that Ray is the central character, and the simplest description of that show is that every single person he deals with, which is the people that are closest to him, are his wife and 2 children. That's the closest circle around him. Then you have his brothers, 3 brothers and a father. That's the next circle around him. Then somewhere in there you have the 2 people who work for him. They're his employees. And then you have his clients. And then you have the people, his partners that he works for sometimes. Every single person is a lit stick of dynamite with a fuse of kind of indeterminate length, and you're just worried all the time that they're gonna go off and ruin Ray's life. Which, for some reason, when I saw that and kind of figured that out for television, that really, really appealed to me. I mean, for a comedy or a drama or whatever, you've got to have everybody that's on camera has got to be able to supply on their own an endless number of stories for your series. And so you can, with Ray Donovan, you can cut to one of his brothers for an entire episode or a string of episodes. You can go to his children, like his son, who I cannot stand, of that character. He'll shove a kid down the stairs in high school, and now all of a sudden Ray's got to do this. Take care of that. The funniest thing about Ray Donovan so far, I've never seen his cell phone battery die. I mean, he always is able to answer the phone and talk wherever he is all the time. It's just the funniest thing. He never says, sorry, I'm not getting a signal. He never says, I got to plug my phone in or let me get a spare battery. That never happens, which tickles me. So who the people are, and another thing that's great about Ray Donovan that I like in just any kind of well-told, complicated story is, especially for television, is how complex the backstory relations between characters are. The thing about this little character relationship chart, which is, you don't even need to see it to make one, is you draw Ray in the middle and then his mother below him because she's an ally, except his mother's not in the movie, in the TV show. And then you draw an arrow connecting Ray to his mom, and what is Ray's dominant attitude towards his mother? You write that down. Then you draw another arrow connecting the mom to Ray. What is her dominant attitude towards him? And then you do that for everybody, and it gets pretty big. I've got a piece of paper about 4 feet wide that's got 5 novels on it and all the characters. But what's amazing when you draw this character relationship chart is you'll draw an arrow from one character to another character that you never expected would connect. And because it's a piece of paper and you're doing it in pencil, it doesn't feel very permanent. And you can then make connections and put people together in the past or the present or whatever in ways that you didn't expect. And I think that is a great thing to do with story, is to keep it alive. And you find things that if you didn't expect it, that means the viewer's not going to expect it, as long as you can make it believable. One of the important things to me with story is that you've got to surprise us, but then we also have to believe it. You can't have a movie about a lemonade stand and all of a sudden aliens come down and smoke these 10-year-olds with their ray gun, unless that's the story you're telling. You want us to understand what's happening and believe what's going on. Otherwise, it's ridiculous. Anybody got a question so far? Yes.
I have a question. My name's Liz Ann. We spoke a little earlier. One of the points you made in the book was the character of your character should be visible with the sound turned off. I thought that was very interesting.
Oh boy, have you seen, there are a couple of movies that you should without fail watch. One is The Artist. See, everyone, let's see, are you writing that down? No, you're not writing that down. I'll wait. The Artist, and then a French film, well, they're both French films actually, called The Triplets of Belleville, which is animated. Neither one of them's got any dialogue in them at all. So they have sound effects, so they're not silent movies, but they have no dialogue. It is amazing how much character you can get across even if they never speak. Now, the odd thing in The Triplets of Belleville is I think they don't ever talk. In a silent movie like The Artist and the Chaplin films and the Keaton films, which you should also watch, I think they talk and we just don't hear them. But I think in The Triplets of Belleville, they just don't talk, and they don't need to talk. And I watched it and I realized like half an hour into it, oh my, they're not talking. And you don't need it. And one of the things that I find with dialogue and writing is you do your first draft, you do your second draft, and you just begin to cut and cut and cut. Because one of the worst things that can ever happen is to make a film and then get into the editing room and have it be too long. And then your editor turns to you and says, you shot this. You don't want them to do that. Or they'll say, why didn't you just cut this scene? I mean, I firmly believe in giving my work to an editor and have them say, what are you going to cut when we get to the editing room? And I just won't shoot it. There's a guy who writes, it's not in my line, I wish it were, a guy named Alec Berg writes for The Simpsons and a bunch of other things now. And he said, the editing room is where hope dies. And you hope it's going to be good when you're writing it. You hope it's going to be good when you're shooting it. But when you get to the editing room, you've got what you've got, and there's no more hope anymore that it can be any better than what you have right now. And so what you really need to make sure that you trim dialogue. So, because what happens, and I've done it, I've been in the editing room with a short film and am trying to take out the spaces between words because it's so boring. I've taken out every sentence I can, and now I've taken out every word I can. Now I'm trying to take out the air between words to make it less boring. So one of the things you want to do for story is cut dialogue down to the minimum. Who else has a question?
Right.
In the back there. You with your hand up high. Yes, I'm so old and so far away. It's great if you don't do this. But
Yeah, he's coming.
yes.
He's coming.
Oh, that will help.
Yeah.
We've done this before.
Hi.
Hey.
So I have a question about basically when you mentioned earlier how funny it is that like comes with spelling and stuff like that. Like, where do you draw the line with realism and like moving a story along. Because like, for me, one of the big things is like in a movie or TV show, when one character tells another character the name of someone else, like, you know, they're relaying information over the phone, they don't even try to spell out the name, and that person already knows how that name is spelled, even though there's a weird spelling. You know, so like I understand for story's sake, it's to move it along, so you don't get bogged down with just trying to be like, oh, it's spelled like, you know.
Yeah, if we have to know it, tell us. People people want to say their names. Well, so Dave, where are we going to dinner? I've never done that in my life. There's a thing I learned from The Wire about dialogue that has really helped me a lot. Is you got a drug dealer here and a drug dealer here, and they're talking to each other about drug dealing, right? They don't see me standing there like I am now. They're just by themselves in a parking lot talking. They got cameras and stuff around them, but the two characters in the story, they're talking about dealing drugs. Both of them speak the language of drug dealing. I, the viewer, do not. And it was fascinating in The Wire. They made no allowance at all for me to understand what was going on. They figured that I would get, from the gist of what these guys were saying, I would kind of understand, oh, there's a big thing happening tomorrow at the docks at noon. Okay, that's all Will needed to understand. Because these two guys that are talking, they don't know we're watching. And that really helped me a lot with my own work, is to say, these guys are talking about what they're talking about. Forget me. And you just got to make sure that there's enough there for the reader to get it and then move on. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Right, we have another.
Yes.
My name's Ebony,
Ah.
and hi. I wanted to ask you if you can talk more about backstory and Ghost
Sure.
that you met in the book.
They're important. Then Ray Donovan, I keep going back to Ray Donovan, that backstory that happened 20 years ago in Boston before the group of people moved to California, it affects everything today. It's so interesting how everything weaves together with the people in Boston who we knew in Boston, what happened in Boston, what happened to me in Boston and didn't happen to you. It all matters. And they don't, the backstory is the stuff that matters in today's story. It's not everything that happened in their life. It's just the stuff that is affecting the present day story. At least that's my definition of it, is that we don't need to know where they went to grade school unless somebody threw a rock and hit them in the nose when they were in grade school, and that matters today. Otherwise, that's for character biography, and it's very important that you know that stuff. But the backstory to me is the specific stuff that is affecting what's going on with the characters in the story today. The ghost, to me, is the one thing that happened that is wrecking their life now. It's the monkey on their back. In fact, there's a great movie called The Man with the Golden Arm, where Frank Sinatra comes back to this little town, part of New York, and gets off the bus, and he's been gone. And his friend there says, "So how are you, Frankie?" Because his name was Frankie, the character. And he says, I'm fine. And he says, "No, really, how are you?" And Frank says, "The monkey's gone," which means this guy was a heroin addict. That's what drives the entire movie, is that in the past he was a heroin addict. There's a great movie that if you don't have the script, I can send it to you, called Ordinary People. And the ghost in that movie is the boy, Timothy Hutton. It's the first movie Robert Redford ever directed, based on a book. Before the movie opened, the boy and his brother, who was much beloved by the mother, the brother was the favorite of the two sons. He was better looking. He was better at everything he did. And they're out sailing at night in a storm, and the ship, the little sailboat, capsizes and the brother drowns. And so the younger brother, before the movie opened, tried to kill himself, slashed his wrist, didn't die. And the movie starts on the day he gets out of the hospital and comes home. And so the ghost, which is that brother's death, and they tell you a little bit in a flashback, and then you tell a little bit more in a flashback, and then a little bit more in the flashback, and you find out that they were holding on over the top of the boat, and finally the other brother let go, and our guy blames himself for his brother's death, and it really wasn't his fault. So that ghost drives that entire movie. but I think you need to pick the right thing. I mean, one of the great questions to ask when you're writing anything is what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? You've got this stuff that you've written or you've decided on, but you can always change. Like, what if it doesn't take place in Brooklyn? What if it takes place on the Upper East Side? Those are two totally different neighborhoods. Brooklyn itself, you got Greenpoint, which is totally different than Park Slope. Place, to me, I'm wandering around a little bit, but place is a very important part of story. We interviewed in my screenwriting class the guy who wrote Black Mass. And Black Mass obviously is a Boston story and is a Southie neighborhood story. And he said, if you can pick up your story and move it to another spot, that means your story's no good if it still works. So you can't take Black Mass and move it to Key West, Florida. It'll totally fall apart. So you need to really, I think, look at its place as as an important thing, like any character. That's a long answer to a very good and short question.
It's interesting that you said that, because they really, for those of you who don't know, Ray Donovan is a fixer in Hollywood. And he's the guy you call in, there's a problem. I think in the pilot, there was one of their clients, it wakes up beside someone who's dead. They have to, he's an actor, and he has to fix this problem. And the way he goes about fixing it is great. But you spoke about a Black Mass, and they used a Whitey Bulger character, didn't they?
Yeah, it was all about Whitey Bulger, yeah.
But the backstory in Boston is abuse by priests, which drives a lot of this.
Well, and Ray Donovan, the television series opens when Ray's father gets out of jail. His friend picks him up. He goes to a church and kills a priest. That's the opening of the series, and that affects, I think, the first 2 years of the series. That one thing. And so there's nothing in a television show or a movie that doesn't matter. And one of the things I find with dialogue in screenplays is people write their characters talking like people talk in real life. And you cut all that stuff out, and you just keep the stuff that's about the story and the characters and moving the thing forward, because it has to move forward relentlessly. It's what I call chit-chat dialogue. And the simplest example of that is a wedding. Y'all have been to weddings. They last forever. Every wedding in a movie is like a half a page long. You know, do you take him? Do you take her? Anybody in the back got anything to say? Kiss her. We're done. And you go, oh, that was a wedding. I believe they're married. You never go, oh, that didn't last long enough to be a real wedding. So it's not real. It's got to seem real, and there's a big difference.
I love what Ray Donovan said. I can guarantee that once in every episode, he's going to say to someone, "If you do that again, I'm going to fucking kill you." I wait for that moment.
Yeah, he is a man of action, which is interesting. I got something else I want you to, before we go off the air, which is not going to be soon, but I have a bad memory, so I want to make sure you write this down, because it's a great writing lesson. You may have already seen it, but go write down on a piece of paper to Google these words. Or you Google YouTube MTVU, which is MTV University is what it stands for, MTVU, South Park NYU writing class. So it's MTVU, South Park, NYU writing class. And the two founders of South Park came to a freshman writing class at NYU at the film school. And there is a lesson in that video that when I saw it, it kind of blew the top of my head off. And I'd never seen it before, like 4 or 5 years ago. And I thought, this is amazing. What the lesson was, it's better when they tell it. But I think this is really important for story, is you have a scene, and then you have another scene after that. And so, like you're doing a beat sheet. So this happens, then the next thing happens. He said there are 2 words that need to go in between this scene and that scene. One word that can go in between is therefore, which is the first scene happens, therefore the next scene happens. This scene is pushing us to that one. And so that's one way to do it. The other one is one scene will lead to a complication in the next scene. And so you have this scene happens, but this scene happens. And that's the best way to have 2 scenes together. Is you have therefore between the 2 scenes or but between the 2 scenes. He said what you don't want, you can have it occasionally, but you do not want to have your outline made of scenes where this happens and then this happens. You want to have it, this happens, but that happens, therefore that happens, therefore that happens, but not a bunch of and, thens, or you're lost. It's going to be boring. You're not going to have any flow from beginning to end. So that's the South Park writing lesson, which now you know. You may have known it already, now you know it again. Is that someone in front with a question?
There.
Hi. You referred to 2 different films, one Down Periscope and Sailors, and how you had made a comment, make all characters, even small ones, have specific, fascinating, memorable character. And you talked about the sailors in that film too.
Yeah. Has anybody seen it Down Periscope besides me? Nah, nobody. It's such a good movie. And you wouldn't think so. It was written by David Ward. I think he directed. He won an Oscar for his very first screenplay, which is The Sting, which if you've never seen, it's a perfect movie. But this is one of the movies that he directed. And it's the main character, which is Kelsey Grammer, and then he's got all these people around him, which is what you're doing with your television series, and they're all interesting. Every single one of them is, 1, they're unique, and 2, we haven't seen them before. This is why you want to ask the what if thing is, well, okay, I wrote this character. Well, that may be a cliche. What if I do this to him? What if I change this? What if this? What if that? And then you get something interesting. There's an American artist named Jasper Johns. If you look him up, his most famous painting is called Flag or American Flag. And it's an American flag on plywood with another American flag on plywood on top of it and a third one on top of that. And his line, this is a good answer to your question about making characters interesting. This is how he created art. And I think this is one of the greatest lessons for story I've ever heard is, he said, take an object, do something to it, do something else to it, do something else to it. And his flag at the time when it sold, the last time it sold, it was the highest price ever paid for a piece of art by a living American artist. So his mantra, which works great for story, is take an idea or take a minor character or whatever you want to say. Take an object, do something to it, do something else to it, do something else to it. Basically a minor character or any character, but minor characters, they got to be different than anybody we've ever seen in a movie. I find it's really helpful to take something from me, my guts, my soul, and put it in a character. And then I can take something else from me and put it in another character. Those 2 things are very different one from the other, but when I see that in a minor character, I can really write that person well because it's part of me. So take a little bit of you and put it in that person, and a little bit of you and put it in that one, and so forth. It's like the one I talk about a lot with my students, although it's a teeny tiny little example, is the pizza delivery kid from Home Alone. I mean, he had like 2 lines in the whole movie, but he had the line, well, you have to pay for the pizza, and he sneered, and I still remember exactly what he looks like and exactly how he said it because it was a good line. Try to go through and make there's a line in my book, actor bait. You want people to want to play these parts, even if they're little bitty parts. And so even if it's a little bitty part, look at that dialogue like you're trying to offer this part to Angelina Jolie and see if you can make it better. Minor characters are very important.
She's available now.
Well, maybe not to act, but she's available for marriage. They've moved her apart. At Madame Tussauds, they've now moved them apart and put them in different parts of the museum. They're not together anymore at the Wax Museum, which is very sad.
To get back to Ray Donovan, what I thought was so interesting is his, and I parallel it with The Sopranos, is his relationship to his father, who he would like to kill.
Yes, and I keep wondering why he doesn't, but he doesn't. There's an interesting thing about The Sopranos that there's a really good book called, what is it called? Difficult Men. Y'all should all read that. Have you read that? Difficult Men is about the last 10 to 15 years of television and the showrunners and how those shows came to be. And it's a great book. But the Sopranos, that woman, that Nancy Marchand, that is the creator of that show's mother.
Yes.
And he was so afraid of her, at least this is my impression, in real life, that he waited until she was dead to do the show. But he took his guts and his own fear of his own mother and made a television series out of it. That came out of him. And I've said it already once. If you can take something that's in you and put it in your writing, I highly recommend it. I mean, that's what's so great about television. You've got the show Girls. That is her guts laid on the table. And she's unique, but then so are you and so am I. The first pitch I ever sold was second or third movie I wrote for money, was based on the business my father had been in, which was the asphalt business in the South. Nobody's ever made a movie about skullduggery in the asphalt business in the South. No one's ever made it yet because the studio, what happened? There was a writer's strike and they canceled all their production deals, and so my script went on a shelf through no fault of my own, which is so sad. But anyway, that story came out of me, my remembrance of what my father did and all of his customers, and my spending tons of time out on the jobs when I was 10 or 12 years old, and I remembered it, but it was a unique situation, the way that business worked, and it was a really good dramatic area with a lot of thievery and bad behavior. And so I took something that came from my own past and made a story out of it, and it worked really well. So the more you can make of yourself in it, the better the story will be. The other thing that I think is of crucial importance about putting something of yourself in it or writing something that really matters to you, which is a little bit different, but everything is hard. Writing is just murder. And if you're writing something that really matters to you, that's maybe about your own past or it's something you firmly believe in telling, then when the going gets tough, which it always does, you won't quit. There's a blogger I really like named Kelly Oxford, and she said, if you loved what you're writing and now you hate what you're writing, you're halfway through. And that's so true. And if you really love this thing, your idea, if it really matters to you that this gets done, when you get to the halfway point, when it's terrible and everything's going down the drain, then you'll keep going. And I think that's one of the hardest things in filmmaking. I teach screenwriting. I teach a class where in the fall they write a 12-page script that they're going to shoot in the spring. And what happens to half of them is Christmas comes and their idea, now they panic over it and they think their idea is terrible and they want to abandon it because there's this shiny, wonderful idea out there that looks like it's really going to be easy to write and wonderful. And they think, oh, it will be better than this horrible thing I'm working on now. Well, the problem is if they didn't have anything invested in the horrible thing, they're going to give it up for the shiny new idea. Well, the problem is the shiny new idea is going to be horrible halfway through also, because everything is. So when you get to the bottom, if it matters to you, you're not going to quit.
I think that's so important that that the passion that you invest in it. When I think the best time I ever had was when I was presented with an idea that to rewrite, which became my favorite year.
Mm-hmm.
And, the premise was Mel Brooks meets.
Was what?
On the show, on a variety show in the 1950s. And I said, I'll do it, but I'm not going to write. I said to Mel, I'm not going to write you. I'm going to write me. He said, why not? I said, you're too abrasive. and it was. And so I really put myself into it. I put my name into it, everything. And it was the most passionate thing. And from my own perspective, my best work. But I was so involved with it, and period. And
it matters. It makes it in some ways easier, but you won't quit. The movie Invictus, the Clint Eastwood movie, and the one Letters from Iwo Jima, those were both personal stories to those writers. They had a world that they knew about, like my father's asphalt business, that nobody knows about. And I took that world that I was very familiar with. And Invictus was about, the woman knew about rugby and Nelson Mandela. And then Flags of Our Fathers was, she was Japanese American, but her father had been in World War II on Iwo Jima. And so she took that story and made stuff out of it. Then she got the movie made because it was personal and no one else could do it.
Okay, hi, I'm Katie. This question is a little, I guess, off track of what we've been talking about, but you mentioned several times that in order to actually, get your script out there, it's all about hooking the reader in the first 10 pages. And if you're writing the pilot to the first season of something, it's like a tactic you have to actually choose the opening that is the one, because you don't have the story yet, so you can have 500 different openings. So that first 10 pages, what would you suggest to finally finding the one?
Well, it's the one that's going to matter later.
Yeah.
It's not just let's meet him while he makes coffee. That's no good. But what's the thing that's going to happen in the scene that we're going to keep going back to over and over again that's going to really matter to the story? And I hate to keep talking about Ray Donovan, but oh well. The scene where the father kills the priest, that pays off for 2 years at least. Everything I showed, I'd never seen Breaking Bad. I assume y'all have all watched all of Breaking Bad. Hope so anyway. I've watched one episode, maybe two. I was going to watch the whole thing this summer and then I didn't have any time. Anyway, so this is, if you're ever teaching, you don't want to do this, but I did it anyway. I went to class and I grabbed the pilot for Breaking Bad and went over there and I said, okay, we're going to watch this. And I'd never seen it, which is really stupid if you're a teacher, but anyway. So what I did, I asked them, I said, okay, we're going to watch the pilot. Y'all have all seen the show, right? Yes, they had. I said, what in here matters in year 5? What stuff in this pilot pays off later on? And I didn't know if anything would because I'd never seen it. I was terrified, but I hadn't anything else to do, and I thought of that. So I put it on, and we stopped the DVD playing, and they were amazed at how much stuff in the pilot mattered 2 years later or mattered a year later. So whatever your opening is needs to matter for a long time. It needs to matter to the story. The one I hate the most is we're going to pan around his room and we're going to see his stuff and we're going to learn about him by looking at his stuff. I can't stand that one. Let's see, what else did I want to say about opening? Can't remember. I hope that helped.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That was, he's in Vince Gilligan is in the Difficult Men book, too, with the Walter White character. And the one thing that, I always tell the story about his inspiration and his pitch to the network on that was, I want to take a character from Mr. Chips to Tony Montana.
Yeah, it's fantastic. That's one of the very first, if not the first, television series where the character had an arc. He started this way, and in television, they normally never change, and then he became something else, and it really, really worked.
Yeah,
it really worked.
Yeah. But that was.
I remember what I was going to say about the beginning. This has nothing to do with story. My apologies. When someone picks up your script, this is a real thing for me, is clean writing. When somebody picks up your script, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to open it up and see how long it is. Then they're going to go to the front and they're going to look at it and they'll read the first page. They cannot tell on the first page if you can tell a story. They got no clue if you know anything about characters. They don't know anything about what your talents may lie in the storytelling world. But what they can tell is if you can write a clear, clean sentence. And if you can write 5 sentences in a paragraph that makes sense and that are easy to understand, that have some punch to them. I am a fanatic on tight writing. My mantra is that nobody wants to read your stuff, which is sort of sad, but anyway, it's true. Is because, I mean, I'll read your script if you pay me. Norman will read your stuff if you pay him, because you're paying him to read it. And he acts like he's dying to read your stuff. He'd rather, go to the beach and read a novel that somebody wrote that he's dying to read. So, and that's true in business. When you give somebody your screenplay, like an agent or a producer or an actor or manager, they'd rather not read it, but they got to read it. And so you got to make it easy for them to read. It's got to be clear, 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 and easy to understand, and well written and punchy and move forward and all that stuff. Because they can pick up your script and they can read page 1 and go, this person can't write. Then you're doomed. It doesn't matter how great your story is, they're not going to finish it. You've got to be able to have the words on the page really clear and quick, and they need to move. And that's obvious, and story's not obvious on page 1. Because when someone sits down to read your script, they've got 2 conflicting thoughts at the same time. One, they want it to be fantastic. They want it to be great. And all you have to do is not disappoint them, because they open it up thinking this is the Holy Grail, this is going to be fabulous. And your job is to just keep that feeling going for them. And then what the other part of their brain is that you don't want is them thinking, I want this to be terrible so I can put it down. Because if they put it down, then they're never going to pick it up again. So you've got to write tight and clean and easy to understand. And you read lots and lots of screenplays, and you'll see who you like in that department and how tight you want to get it. Alien and Hard Times by Walter Hill are the tightest there are. And I've written 2 or 3 scripts in that style, and it's actually very difficult to do, to write with almost no words on the page. But it's better to write with few words than it is with lots and lots and lots of words. Ask me a question.
We call this the TV writer's studio, but my feeling, and I don't know if you agree or disagree, is that if you can write, if you tell stories, and you can write for television, you can write for any medium, screen.
Absolutely.
Is there any difference in your mind, other than obviously television? You're looking at 5 years, and films may.
I think storytelling is storytelling. I mean, some novelists can be very long-winded, and that works great for them. You can't do that with a script for a movie or a television. They don't have time to wade through lots and lots of descriptive prose. Also, it's not your job as the screenwriter. My favorite, which is, I wish were my line, and it's in my book, it says, interior Bob's apartment, a shitty room. Well, that's enough. It made a picture in your mind. It's not the same as a picture in my mind, but it's enough for us to move on. The production designer will decide what that actually looks like with the director. So I think that's important, is to just get on with it. Ask me the question again in a different way, and I'll give you a better answer.
No, I don't. I think it's just, my feeling is just about storytelling, and you fit it to whatever the medium.
It's the same. I mean, I wrote a novel, which I wish I could hold up, but I don't have it with me. It's a children's book, sort of, but I structured it like a screenplay. It's got 8 acts. Each little one builds to the next one and the next one and the next one. So you could say it's got 3 acts, or you could say it's got 4, or you could say it's got 8. Whatever it is, I built it like I build screenplays. And the scenes, I built like scenes. And I tightened up that writing till it squeaked. And when I finally sent it in, the publisher read it and bought it 3 days later. And when the time came for the editor to mess with it, they really didn't have any changes, which was very nice for me, because I'd tightened it up and they didn't have to mess with the writing any. But you could tell at least I knew how to write a sentence when you read the first page of the thing, so then you're going to keep going. I'm back to my same thought of make it tight. But storytelling is storytelling of any kind. There's a lot of oral storytelling. The Moth, I don't know if y'all listen to The Moth on the radio, but it's amazing the stories that they tell there. You can learn from everything. You can learn from plays. You can learn from short stories. You need to read all the time. You need to not just read screenplays. You need to read plays, anything, because you're going to pick up stuff constantly. I mean, I'm harping on Ray Donovan today because that's the TV show I watch like religion. And so it's a big part of my existence. A year from now, I'll be talking about something else, maybe the novel that I read. But every kind of storytelling, you can learn from it, but then every kind of storytelling, you can bring something to the table. I really like television. I think it's the best medium for a storyteller because the writer's in charge, and that's rare.
I told the story this morning of I was listening to David Axelrod, who was interviewing the screenwriter for The Imitation Game, who won the Academy Award. And it was so interesting because he latched on to this character of Alan Turing, who was, and I'm not going to assume that the screenwriter was gay, but Alan Turing was gay and persecuted and prosecuted for it.
Right.
And he had also committed suicide, or had attempted to commit suicide. So he had those connections going in, and he ends up writing his soul through this character. And I thought, if you get a chance, the David Axelrod podcast is amazing. It's wonderful. He knows this young man, and he's gone on to write books, but he so connected to that character, he lived it.
What's one thing that's really cool in Imitation Game that I learned the miniature version of this from the guy who wrote the original Batman, Sam Hamm. He said, give your character a detective agenda. And there are 3 different detective stories flowing through the Imitation Game. One is...
And then let me interrupt. It's a Sherlock Holmes devotee as well, the writer. So it was all, and that piece was about detective stories.
Yeah, because that's what Imitation Game is. It's 3 intertwined kind of flashback, each one, but a different detective story that they've got to solve. And it makes your hero active, which is great. It gives them something to do. And even in my children's book, I gave the hero, this little 4th grade boy, a detective agenda, some big question that he's trying to solve, because it made him take active steps all the way through. And active hero is everything.
We have another question.
I think you might have answered my question as I was coming up here. My name is Teresa Park. I want to ask you, how do you decide who your central character should be?
That's a good question.
This is interesting because this is going to go to our pilot that we're developing now. Is who is the central character?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be Falk. It could be somebody else, and you can make a mistake and go down the wrong road for a long, long time. Then you finally say, "Oh, I've got the wrong main character." That's one of the what if questions, because it's a hard question to ask, because you don't think, well, I've picked the wrong person to build this around. But it's a good question to ask. Have I picked the wrong central character? And I think it's the one who can take action. That's one thing. It's one that everybody revolves around. It can't be somebody standing off to the sidelines just sort of watching everything happen here. It needs to be the person. That's why they call it the central character. It's got to be the person that everyone is tied to somehow. And that's why that silly little character relationship chart that you draw on a piece of paper, or you draw on a great big piece of paper, really helps, because you can see, are they tied to pretty much everybody? The central character needs to be the one who solves the big problem at the end. mean, that's one of the problems with the Disney Pinocchio is Pinocchio doesn't do much. He just reacts. And you need to be the one, your hero needs to be the one who's getting stuff done. Making choices, making bad decisions, but then getting things done. And then at the very end of the story, they're the one, if it's an hour at the end of the hour, but it's, you give them the win, they've got to earn the win. And one thing I see a lot is what I call an unearned gift, is the writer just gives this hero a piece of information that they didn't have to work to get. And so what you do is you go through your outline with a highlighter and mark, oh, here's a piece of information he got. Here's another piece of information he got. Did he have to struggle to get it? Did somebody punch him in the nose and then he got it? Okay, that's more interesting than some, like in Pinocchio, the blue fairy just, drops it out of the sky to Pinocchio. That's boring. That you don't want. So they've got to be solving problems. They need to be the person that everybody is wrapped around. And then they've also got to be the most interesting person on screen. Because if the most interesting person there is not the hero, then maybe that person's your main character.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alan?
Hello,
Hey,
Who you are?
my name is Alex Gonzalez. I actually have a question about information. I was wondering, how do you reveal information without it sounding very clunky and obvious?
okay. I've got, I can find it. There's a scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark that I just say, here, go see this. There are a couple of them. He is a master of telling you stuff and you don't notice it. There's the beginning scene where they're in the big library with the chalkboards, and one guy's talking to Indiana Jones and they're finding out about the city of Tanis. And they tell you so much stuff in there, but you don't even notice that they're telling you stuff. They just hide it so well. Then later in the movie, they've got the little round thing that you're supposed to stick on the end of the stick. And they have the front of it and they read the stuff that's on the front, and then they have the back of it and they read the stuff that's on the back. And they realize that the Nazis don't have the back, so they don't know that it's actually supposed to be 4 feet taller, so they have their sticks too short or too tall, and so they're looking in the wrong place. And I'll make a note and send those links to Norman. And you can just see the scenes because it's easier to find if you have the link. But the one with the round thing and the stick, they add another layer of interest to the scene that you're paying attention to, which is the scene opens and it's in whatever the Arab city is. I don't know where it is. Marrakesh, let's say. I'm making that up. And the scene opens and a person comes in from the street and dumps poison all over these dates that are on a bowl on a tray. And then that person leaves. And then the little boy comes in and picks up the tray, and you follow the tray into the room where Indiana Jones is having a meeting with his friend Solemn. And so they're talking about all this stuff. And so Indy picks up one of the poisoned dates and he's carrying it around in his hand. And there's he about eats it, and then his friend says, hold on, about something else. And then there's a monkey picks up another one of the dates, and they're talking about all this stuff, information that you gotta know. But you're not paying any attention to the information. You're thinking about, is Indy gonna eat that date and die? And then finally he throws it up in the air and it's falling down and he's about to catch it, and his friend reaches out and catches it out of the air and takes it away, and they point over on the ground and there's the monkey dead. And so now the scene's over. We've been given all this information. We had no idea where it was given to us. My image is they sort of slide it under the door. There's a really good movie called The Game with Michael Douglas. And it's at the end of the movie, the guy has lost every single thing he has. He's walking with no shoes in a Mexican desert in a very nice suit, and that's literally all he has. His bank accounts are gone. Everything he has is gone. He's got a Rolex watch, and so he sells the Rolex watch and goes back to San Francisco. And he goes to the office where the bad guys were, and it's completely empty. There's no one there at all. They've completely disappeared. So he's got nothing except he has one thing. The only thing he knows about these bad guys is where they like to eat their takeout lunch. And so he goes and he hangs out at that little Chinese restaurant, and then one of the bad guys comes in to pick up the lunch, and then he follows him back to their new office, and then everything can move forward. Okay, so that's, you asked about information. That's a critical piece of information that they have to tell you. So cut to an hour earlier in the movie when Michael Douglas has got the clipboard, he's in the office, he's signing up to play the game at the very beginning. And so they have to tell you the name of the Chinese restaurant. Well, they're not going to have somebody come in and say, well, you know, we all like to eat at Man Lung. It's the best Chinese in town. If you ever have a chance, you should go there. They don't do that. What they do is, while he's filling out the clipboard, no, excuse me, that's not it. The dude that is giving him the clipboard comes in with a big plastic bag with 5 orders of Chinese takeout in it, and it's dripping. And he's holding the clipboard in the other hand. And so that's dripping on the clipboard, and that's what you're concentrating on. He says, oh my, Man Lung is the best Chinese in San Francisco. Here's the clipboard. Sorry about the goo all over it. And then you don't pay any attention to it. And an hour later, you remember it. That's my favorite example of hiding exposition, is they make you think about something else when they're giving you the little nugget that you have to know. And when you see the scene, what's amazing to me is you see the scene and you don't pay any attention to what the guy said about the Chinese restaurant. And then an hour later, when he's got nothing and he goes to the Chinese restaurant, you go, aha, I know where that came from. So that's my thought on hiding information. But the Indiana Jones stuff is great, and I'll send you those links.
Thanks.
And here comes Katie. I have one of the great things that I love is that this is what we all feel this is what it's about.
Yes.
And Chinatown is a great example of that. You're led to believe that it's about some water crisis and some absolute scam that's going down, a money-making deal. But it's really a film. The central point is about incest, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that relates.
It's about what happened to that woman. And
yes. You don't find out.
Yeah. You think it's about water, and it turns out it's about a gigantic real estate deal. And we meet the horrible father who's in charge of the real estate deal, and it turns out the girl that we thought was this woman's sister is really her daughter, and it just gets darker, darker, and darker. And then the cool thing there is, we talked about backstory in Ghost in Chinatown, and he says it. He just says it. He says, he was in Chinatown as a policeman, and he got out of there, and she said, why did you leave Chinatown? He said, there was a woman he cared for, and he made a mistake, and I assume she got killed. And so he doesn't want that to ever happen again, so he's staying out of Chinatown. And so it is, every time he goes into Chinatown, you know he's uncomfortable because of what happened in the past. But it starts off to be this one thing, and then it goes and becomes some other much, much, much larger thing. And so you're never bored.
Yeah, I know. Announce yourself.
Hi, I'm the other Katie in the classroom.
Are you the smarter Katie?
I'd like to think so, but you know. All right, so I have kind of a two-part question. First off, for the character relationship chart.
Yep.
Let's say that you have something that's kind of akin to Game of Thrones is the best example I could give, where you have there's multiple story arcs. They've actually, I know that universities have actually run statistical analysis and actual complex mathematical equations to figure out who the actual main character is, because no one has any idea. But all of their arcs are relevant to the overall who's going to get the Iron Throne question.
Right.
So in a situation like that, are you starting with characters and building their relationships to each other, or are you starting with one character and then hiding the fact that they're a main character within this overall
Well, they started with a main character and hid the fact that he wasn't the main character.
Okay.
That's one thing they did, because the whole first season was about one person, and then it became clear that they really weren't the main character. And then, but by then, they planted all these different factions. They're the people here, and there's that story we can go to, and they're the people here, and there's that story we can go to, and they all kind of tie together, so everybody becomes interesting. And then, of course, what they do in Game of Thrones is they'll kill anybody. And I haven't watched it in a while. I haven't looked to see if the people I really like are dead now. But was it the writer? Yeah, it was one of the producers or somebody said, yeah, I love it when the actors say, I'm really enjoying my character, and you go, oh, you've never read the books. You don't know you're about to die.
Yes.
So
Yes.
they hooked us into one person and his big problems in season 1, and then they introduced us to a lot of other people who also had big problems. And so when it became clear that that guy was not going to be the main character, we were already really interested in everybody else. That's what I took out of Game of Thrones.
That leads into my second question. And I'll use Harry Potter as an example because it's gave me some of the best examples. What happens when you start a story and you're so far in with this main character and you've got secondary characters that are really coming to be more interesting? Do you go back to the beginning and make them the star of the show, or do you kind of let them just finish out this plot and then do a Better Call Saul, spin-off?
Are you saying this is something that's already airing now, or is this something we're just sitting around writing and figuring out?
If you're during the writing process, because like I said, I use Harry Potter as an example. Some of the secondary characters in Harry Potter I thought were more interesting than Harry, and yes, he was the central thing that tied them all together. But there were other things mentioned in that series that I thought could have been a spin-off had J.K. Rowling
Right.
writing.
But the thing about that was the first book came out, and then she still hadn't written the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of had a plan, but if you've ever seen that sheet of paper online of what her plan was, it was complicated and kind of detailed, but not nearly enough detail to where she would have known that so and so is going to be more interesting. I think if you're writing something and you haven't done anything with it yet, and you're beginning to suspect that this character may be more interesting, either you make them the central character, or you go back to your central character and make her more interesting, and so then she has to give her more muscle.
Okay.
I mean, that's the great thing about, until you turn it in, you can still change it. And
Okay.
One of the hardest things about writing is getting it ready to go and then turning it in and not going, oh, I should have changed this, but I didn't. I mean, there's nothing like handing something in to your teacher or to your boss for you to suddenly find the typos.
Yeah.
Oh, well, God, I wish I'd have read that. That's one of the handouts that I think I sent Norman is print to proofread. I'm not very green. I could care less about our environment. We can all go to hell in a handbasket. It doesn't matter to me, but I want to burn paper like crazy, because if you don't print your work to proofread it, and my students all say, oh, but I want to be green. And I say, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. You can't be green and be a writer. You have to print your work on a piece of paper and hold a pen in your hand and proofread it and rewrite it and mark it up, because the way your brain connects to the page with a pen in your hand is different than your brain connects to the page if you're looking at a computer. And you can believe me or not believe me, but I'm right, and if you don't believe me, you are wrong. And that's just the deal. Because I've never found any study that supports it, but I've talked to writer after writer after writer after writer, and they all say you have to have a piece of paper. Now, you don't have to print it every time. You can go through it, do a draft and a rewrite in the computer, and then you print one. Because for one thing, you cannot find typos in a computer. I don't know why, but you cannot. If you're in my class and you don't run your spell check and there's a misspelled word, you just get an F on the assignment, because I think you're just stupid and lazy. And if everybody's really clear on, if you don't run your spell check, Akers will give you an F. Because I had an agent who said, I read to the first typo. And so he's looking to put it down, as I said earlier. So don't give them an excuse. You would never hand someone a script and say, I'm kind of stupid, and there are a lot of grammatical mistakes in here, but I really need the job really bad. Do you mind hiring me, even though I'm an idiot? that's never going to work in your favor. So print to proofread, it'll really, really help. It's amazing how much better your stuff is. And I was at school, we have a very, very long hallway. My office is at the end of the hallway, and at the other end of the hallway is this lounge. And so there are 4 students sitting in chairs. One of them had her back to me as I walked all the way down this hall towards where she was sitting. And she had her homework or a script page was open in front of her. I don't remember why I walked all the way down the hall, but I walked all the way down the hall, came up behind her, looked down at her page and said, "Oh, there's a typo there," and turned and walked back down the hall. Then it scared him to death. Anyway, I'm really good at seeing typos.
Okay, so
There were in my novel, my novel was 41,000 words, and there were 2 typos in the 41,000 words. And I turned it in. Anyway, next question.
Go ahead.
oh, thank you.
You are definitely the smarter Katie.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. I have to move it up. Thank you.
What are some tips you have for curing or working through writer's block?
Well, write for television. That'll cure you right quick.
Yeah.
Because if you don't turn it in, they fire you. So you can have writer's block for an hour, but you can't have writer's block for a day. There's a really cool documentary that I need to buy on the television series Homicide: Life on the Streets. And so the camera's following the producer down the hall. And then the writer is coming towards the producer. And the writer says to the producer, "So when do you need those pages?" And the producer said, "Tomorrow." And the writer said, "No, really, when do you need the pages?" And the producer says, "Tomorrow." So you don't get to have writer's block in television. One cure for writer's block is to write down in great and honest detail why you can't write. That'll help. Basically, my cure for writer's block is to keep writing. I can't solve a problem if I'm not sitting, either one of 2 things. If I'm not sitting there typing or writing with a pencil, and then I walk and dictate a lot. I've got a handheld recorder. Where is it? It's never far away. And I carry it everywhere, and I dictate into it and type it up when I get home. And I can solve a lot of problems by walking and talking. It engages your brain in a different way. But for me, how to beat writer's block is to just sit there, write and write and write and write. Yeah.
He wrote this book in his. I said, "Where'd you write this book?" He said, "In my car." That Mrs. Ravensbach, right?
Yeah, I dictated the whole book in the first person, pretending to be a German woman. And so I'm speaking German with a female tone of voice and with I'm speaking English with a German accent while I'm driving to work every day with the windows rolled up. I don't want anyone to hear me. But dictating is a great way to make your brain go in a different way. I mean, another thing about writer's block is if you just attack the page in a different way, change from a typewriter to a pen, change from a computer to a typewriter, go to a bar instead of a coffee shop, go to a park. I mean, one thing is you've got to not be interrupted. If you do not value your writing time, like if you say, "I'm going to go work on my homework in my room, don't bother me," and you come out 10 minutes later, your roommates are going to know they can go in your room and bother you anytime. But if you say, "Do not come in my room, I'm not coming out for 4 hours," and then you don't come out for 4 hours, that'll help. One thing you have to fight that I didn't have to fight when I was your age was the internet. And so now I have to fight it. And I've got ADD. And so anything over here is going to be more interesting than what I'm concentrating on over here. So I've got a program on my computer called Mac Freedom that's $10, and then there's one called Self-Control that's free, which I don't like as much, and it kills your internet connection. You cannot get online for however many minutes you tell your computer. Your computer will not go online for 5 hours, whatever it is, and that keeps you off of Facebook. The print to proofread handout that I sent Norman was written by one of my students, and what he learned and what I learned was that because he writes his homework out, he does his rewrite on paper, he's not on a computer, he's not on the internet, and he got his homework done in half the time because he wasn't screwing around on Facebook or looking stuff up. So paper's a good thing for that reason, but writer's block my short version, my long answer is you've got to just sit down and keep doing it. And even if you're depressed, you got to keep doing it. The last chapter in my book, or one of the last chapters, it said you don't know you can write your way out of a hole. And that's the difference between you and me, is that I've been doing this so long, I get just as depressed when I write and it doesn't work and I want to jump in front of a bus. But the difference between me and you is I've been doing this so long that I know that it doesn't matter how depressed I get because I'm failing. If I just sit down another day or another hour, the answer will come and I'll have solved the problem, and then I move forward and I'm not depressed anymore. When I get depressed, I take naps, and because the energy just sinks out of me. So my record is 4 naps in a day because I couldn't figure out the answer to some problem. Then when you finally figure it out, you go, why didn't I see this 3 days ago? Because it's so easy. Well, the reason is you had to put in the 3 days worth of time to find that answer. So my feeling about writer's block is try to avoid feeling depressed, because this happens to every single writer. It's not just you, but when it's you, you think it's just you. And just keep writing. Figure out a way to just keep thinking and thinking and thinking, and then eventually the answer will come. And once you've got enough experience knowing the answer will come, you can sit back down even though you're monumentally depressed because the answer is not coming. It will come. Well, there you go.
Thank you.
I gotta go. One last question?
One last from Chris.
All right, so I know this is like the big thing that people always tell us. It's like, show, don't tell. And then when it comes to like the past for like characters and stuff like that, like a lot of television movies use flashbacks these days a lot. And exactly, and for me as a viewer, like the show Arrow, half of an episode is flashbacks, and I tune myself out because I don't really care sometimes on the story of the flashback. But like, what would you do to tell like the past, but like still show it in a way without having to resort to a flashback?
Well, somebody can say in dialogue what happened in the past in 2 sentences. And you don't have to have 6 pages of flashback. It's amazing what you can get done very quickly in dialogue. You remember that time you and I did this? Yes. If you want to see a really great use of flashback, Baz Luhrmann's first film, Strictly Ballroom, has got some flashback in it, but what happens in that flashback really affects the present. You learn about what happened in the past, but what we learn is affecting what's going on now. That's a great movie and a great use of kind of limited flashback. But if flashback works, use it. It's a good storytelling tool. But if you can figure out a way not to do it and just keep the movie, the story flowing from front to back in the right order, it's easier. It's just flashback kind of gets in the way. But it can be used very effectively, but it also becomes a big old crutch. You just say, let's do a flashback. I find beginning writers, my students, often they just want to do it in a flashback, and I got to say, no, what's another way of getting this information to the audience other than showing what happened in the past? Because sometimes telling is quick.
Well,
Thank you
so much, and I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
I could keep you here for the rest of the day, but thank you.
I got to go to lunch. So. Hope it was helpful. Buy all of my books.
Take care. Well,
Bye-bye. Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you.